I know that some in our audience know the finer points of hockey.
The Chris Johnston Show.
We are your friends.
The biggest stories, bringing you inside the game.
What did you hear?
The Chris Johnston Show. Powered by Sports Interaction, Canada's sportsbook.
What is going on?
Here's Chris with your host, Julian McKenzie.
Part of the game.
This is going to be a really packed show on the Chris Johnston Show today. We are going to spend quite a bit of time on the Mitchell Miller situation. And I'll add this as we peer behind the curtain a little bit. We are actually recording right now as Cam Neely, president of the Bruins, is addressing media. We will get to that a little bit later in the show. We will get 2 questions for Ask CJ. And we will talk to David Bastel on the other side of this segment for our You Can Bet That segment with Sports Interaction. There is one thing I've noticed, because I do want to start off a little light. Well, sort of light here, or at least you can see with how I'm going to frame this. There's a storyline that you mentioned from one of our previous episodes where we looked at the 10 best storylines. There's a storyline that's starting to not become as true, or at least has changed in recent days. I'll go through that list here. The NHL's Department of Player Safety has been quiet. It's the last bullet point you have on the story you wrote about that, and also that episode we did on storylines. And about in the less than 2 weeks since we've highlighted that, we're now coming off a weekend where both Josh Anderson of the Montreal Canadiens and Matthew Tkachuk have both been suspended for their gestures. So much for being quiet.
Yeah, I think I also attached like a little bracket at the bottom of that item and was like, I'm knocking wood because I know that there's games every day, and you know, let's face it, it's not going to be quiet forever. I mean, where do we start with these suspensions? You know, the Anderson one is pretty clearly a dangerous hit on Alex Pietrangelo. I really don't see debate in either case, frankly. I guess the debate might be, especially with Tkachuk's, that you know, there's an intent to injure there. Perhaps, you know, he should have been given more than the 2 games he did receive. But yeah, we're starting to see the temperature go up a little bit around the league, and it was a really quiet October, though. If you look historically, there just was not many suspensions or fines or the like given out. But you know, the calendar flipped in November, and everyone's getting a little more spicy.
Yeah, seriously. You're right on the Josh Anderson hit. That's pretty blatant. But I want to focus on the Tkachuk play a little bit more, where he gets called for high sticking. He essentially puts his stick inside Jonathan Quick's mask. Like, when you see that, how does that change Tkachuk's reputation? Is that something that kind of rings bells in your mind about the type of player that Matthew is?
It's like one of those things that just feels unnecessary, right? I mean, we understand the sort of agitating pest-like aspect of his game, that's part of, you know, what he's seeking to do. But, you know, he doesn't have to go to that level. And it's funny, I was not watching that game, but I looked at Twitter and I saw a couple of people highlighting the play, and I had to watch it like 3 times to figure out what happened there. Like it was sort of sneaky, sly, dirty. I mean, once you realize what he's doing, you can see the intent is clearly there to do just that, and to, you know, get in Jonathan Quick's grill. But yeah, I don't know that it doesn't. A lot of stuff happens on the ice. It doesn't change my total view of him, but I do think that's an unnecessary, sort of unforced type of play. You know, I don't mind him, you know, jawing at opponents. I don't mind him playing hard between the whistles, but just junk like that. You don't need it. Let's just face it. You just don't need it. There's a line, and that clearly was right across it.
I'm glad that you also expressed confusion in looking at it, because I think I was trying to look at 3 different players with the clip going on before I realized, oh, that's Matthew right kind of behind Jonathan Quick getting the stick in. I was at one point, I was looking at someone who ended up being, I think, Carter Verhaeghe. I'm trying to figure out, well, what did he do? There's another player on the ice not too far. I'm like, okay, I don't know what's going on here. And then I noticed the stick. It took me a while too.
I didn't know if he stepped on him at first, or if I was to be watching something with his feet, you know, because anyway, it was sneaky. But the cameras caught it. There's cameras everywhere at these games now. And, you know, I wouldn't have minded seeing a little longer suspension there. You know, Matthew Tkachuk's been suspended before. Mm-hmm. And I think, again, where I am with hits, and we've had this discussion, sometimes a hit is an awful hit that you're not defending, but we can't necessarily say the intent was bad with a hit because the play is so fast, right? And so we're not between the ears of a player, and you might, we don't know always what someone's thinking. In that case, you can see what he's thinking, right? Like the intent isn't really up for debate. It's not like his stick just happened to get caught there by accident. I mean, that's a deliberate, direct act, and it's done, to cause injury and certainly to get into the mind of the goaltender. So, I think that there could have been a case for a longer suspension there, but, I don't think the league in general wants long suspensions. Matthew Tkachuk's a premier player, and, the Florida Panthers are better with him in the lineup. It's better for the game if players like him are in the game. And so I don't think it's a league mandate in general to suspend too long. I just think that they want to have some degree of suspension because you have to have a line somewhere, but ultimately they're not looking to take these guys out of the action for too long.
Biggest reason why I was paying attention to that potential suspension for Matthew Tkachuk, if it went anywhere around 5 games, we're talking about him potentially missing him hosting the Calgary Flames, I believe, on the weekend of the 18th of November. In fact, they play each other twice, 2 different venues in the month of November. So to your point about not long suspensions, I wonder if the NHL saw that date in the calendar and thought, let's table that date.
I don't know if they think quite like that, but I mean, that's the general thinking though, right? I mean, look, the owners, it's a really fine line. I think justice it's a difficult thing because obviously if you just started handing out 10-game suspensions all over the place, you'd probably have a lot cleaner sport because, no player wants to miss that much time, lose that much money, all those sorts of things. But then you're taking players out of the game for, a 12th of the season or whatever. So a 10th of the season. And so, I do think it's not an easy job. I'm actually somewhat more sympathetic to them. I understand why people are critical and have all these memes about NHL player safety. I think they're tasked with a near impossible job, and they're just trying to keep it somewhere fair, and they're trying to have the game not go into crazy vigilante justice. Anyway, it has still been a pretty clean season, all things considered, compared to where we've come from. And yeah, let's just hope we don't see. We just don't need that one again. The Josh Anderson play, you don't like that hit, but it's in the course of a game. I'm not certain he's out there trying to injure Alex Pietrangelo. I think it's a situation gone wrong, a bad decision made in a split second. I do think those things are going to happen at a sport played at this speed that's this physical, but some of this sort of sideline stuff we don't need.
Exactly. Also, every time you say vigilante justice, I think of you in the Batman costume.
Oh man, I'm trying to forget that.
Sorry. Anyway, time to bring on David Bastel from Sports Interaction. Only for those 19 and over, Ontario only. We ask that you play responsibly, and there is a link to responsible gaming strategies in the description of the show. Remains to be seen if we'll have links to vigilante justice in the description, but you'll definitely find some great stuff in the description. It's time for You Can Bet That.
Sports Interaction, Canada's Sportsbook, presents You Can Bet That with David Bastel. Must be 18 plus. Please play responsibly. Ontario only.
Welcome to You Can Bet That with David Bastel. Hi, David. Remember to hit up sportsinteraction.com/SDPN for all of your gaming needs. Let's go through 2 games tonight involving Alberta teams. Let's start with the one I cover, the Calgary Flames. They happen to be in Long Island playing against the New York Islanders. DB, what do you got?
Yeah, you know what? Only 3 games on this very quiet Monday schedule. You got 2 Alberta teams. First one, the Flames in New York. Flames losers of 4 straight, but they're still favorites on Long Island, which is kind of surprising to me because the Islanders have played rather well, CJ. 5 out of the last 6 games have been victories. Pretty good money on Islanders. When you look at a single game, you could get them about 2-1 to win this actual game. But you have to think the Flames are going to get on track eventually here because the Flames are much better than what they're playing as of late.
Absolutely. And they got people like Julian holding their feet to the fire right now. So a little bit of tension around a team like that as they head out on the road. And so, I'm surprised to see the Islanders listed as that big of a favorite. But I do think it's a matter of when, not if, that the Flames will turn things around.
be sure to check out my latest on The Athletic, where I sure put those feet to the fire when it comes to the Calgary Flames. The Edmonton Oilers and the Washington Capitals are the second of the two Alberta teams in action tonight. What about that matchup, DB?
Yeah, they're also on the East Coast as well, Julian. Oilers, losers of 2 straight. They are the favorites on the road in Washington. And you don't really see that too often with Washington having home ice and being an underdog at home. So pretty good value on the Capitals, but they have lost 4 straight games. So we're looking at a couple different teams, a couple different matchups where the teams that are losing are in a pretty good spot here. So 227 are the underdog Capitals. They can definitely get this done against the Oilers tonight, CJ.
They can. I expect that to be a bit of a goal fest too. It seems like every game the Oilers play, there's pucks going in en masse on both ends of the ice. But tough start in Washington, tough start in Pittsburgh. All these veteran teams were used to being winners. Sort of stumbling out of the gate here and under some fire early on in the season.
Absolutely. David, thank you so much for joining us on You Can Bet That. Don't forget to check out sportsinteraction.com/SDPN for all the best odds before game, in game, and the best props. Again, sportsinteraction.com/SDPN. Thanks, DP.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, it's time to talk Mitchell Miller. This is one of the strangest, weirdest, most infuriating, frustrating, disappointing stories I think I've ever had to, not really cover, but just talk about on any type of platform, because there's been so many moments from the beginning of this on the Friday to the present day where, again, as I mentioned before, we're doing this as Cam Neely is addressing the media. There's been so many moments where you're just like, what? Why is this happening? This person's involved. This person said this. We can go through, I guess, a bit of a mini timeline where on Friday, the Boston Bruins announced they were signing the controversial defenseman Mitchell Miller, who had been convicted in a juvenile court for bullying a black special needs teenager on repeated instances. The Bruins had signed him to an entry-level contract in the hopes of just having them on their team. Members of the Bruins like Patrice Bergeron, Nick Foligno, and Brad Marchand commented on it, seemingly not in favor. Gary Bettman, seemingly surprised at what happened, saying that it would take a lot for Mitchell Miller to be eligible in the National Hockey League. It's revealed throughout the weekend that Eustace King is his agent. He puts out a statement listing some of the different organizations that Miller worked with. One in particular, the Carnegie Initiative, says no, they didn't. And then on the Sunday night, Miller's contract terminated. All the while, CJ, the family of the victim of the terrible thing that Mitchell Miller did, not consulted by the Bruins. Miller apparently tried to reach out to the family via Instagram DM. I know I'm missing out on a few other pieces of commentary and maybe other finite details, but when you consider everything that's happened over the last little while, it's very strange, and for a lot of hockey fans who have made it known online, very disappointing.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling that happened. And it was inevitable from Friday midday when the Bruins announced that this was not going to, there was no world that this was going to work out. And they made a terrible decision. A reprehensible, awful, completely, there's no small justification out there that they can say, yeah, but, and they didn't think of the victim. And I think that's something that's been lost in a lot of even the commentary I've seen. I can't even put myself obviously in this person's shoes, but I can to the degree to think of, imagine having this just come up repeatedly and sort of having to relive all this stuff and knowing all along that there's been absolutely zero remorse shown from Mitchell Miller towards Isaiah Meyer Crothers, the boy he bullied for years. And so I think the one thing that is important to understand here is there is a path back. Like, if you want to talk about second chances for people, but you really have to have shown some legitimate contrition, like, and an apology on social media a week before signing this contract is not even close to that, obviously. So I can't believe, the Bruins didn't phone the victim's family, at least to get more information before ever, as part of whatever due diligence that they claim to have conducted here. And as of Sunday night, they still hadn't phoned the victim's family, even with an apology. Now, they put an apology in the press release, from Cam Neely, while announcing that they were parting ways with Mitchell Miller. But, I just think that this was bungled from top to bottom by the Bruins. I'll give their players credit too, Julian. I was in their dressing room on Saturday morning. They had a morning skate after this was announced. I, in my entire career, cannot recall an instance seeing players openly disagree with their organization in the forceful, respectful manner that the three players you mentioned did. That should tell you everything you know. I mean, let's face it, players generally want to stay in their own lane, not wade into topics of what management decision are. Like Patrice Bergeron, probably one of the most respectable and respected athletes in our entire sport, is saying, I disagree with this. This isn't what the Bruins stand for. This isn't the culture that we built here. Brad Marchand, Nick Foligno, a newer member of the team, the fact that management did something that their own players were questioning in real time, that Don Sweeney had a press conference on Friday afternoon, and he said, I can't defend the decision, categorically say this is correct. I don't know how they got here. I don't know how they did that. They must have obviously thought they could get away with it, right? This is an organization that doesn't have a ton of prospects. Obviously, they've been all in trying to win for years and years and years, and they saw an opportunity to grab a right shot defenseman who put up big numbers in the USHL last year, and everything else be damned. I can't figure out anything other than that is what they were thinking. And I mean, if you want to find some hope in all this, or is it categorically no one defended them, if you know what I'm saying? I didn't see anyone out there defending them. Like, the league didn't have their back. The American Hockey League wasn't, I don't believe, going to let Mitchell Miller play in that league, even though that decision hadn't been reached. Their fans, their own players, the media. I mean, there was nobody standing up, or very few people standing up saying, like, this makes sense. And so they got it wrong, and now they're eating it. And, I've seen in some of the tweets that have come out, Matt Porter, Ty Anderson, some of the reporters there in Boston covering Cam Neely's press conference. I mean, he's admitting they made the wrong decision, that they didn't phone the family. They should have phoned the family, but all that should have been obvious, before they ever got to the point of signing a contract.
This should leave a stain on the Boston Bruins organization in some way, right? Like, this shouldn't just be something that, we make a big deal of in the moment, and then 6 months later we're just like, oh yeah, the Bruins, they're this. Like, this is something that people should remember for a very long time. And I think the fact that the players went against them, and the fans obviously are going to, I think a lot more fans nowadays are trying to be up to date on this type of stuff and are trying to be a little bit more conscious about it. The fact that they're up on it, like, this isn't something that we should just be like, oh yeah, that was just like a random fever dream weekend. Like, this is something that we should be pointing this out about the Boston Bruins for a long time. That is a bad mistake on their part to even consider bringing about a player who has shown no remorse for what they did. And I mean, look, we want to talk about second chances, and we want to talk about them about them doing the work to earn that second chance. Putting yourself in a situation, I'm sorry to be graphic with the details here, where you're consistently bullying a teenager, doing disgusting acts to the point where the victim has to take an SDT test. Like, what? And the fam. Oh my God, it's a very infuriating situation. I'm trying not to, dialing it back here. Like, it's absolutely ridiculous in terms of earning a second chance. If you want to get to a point where you want to be a functional person of society, that's one thing. But to a point where we have to talk about, hey, he has to do this work so he can play in the National Hockey League. Now we're at a point where we're like, well, you know what? He's never going to play in North America. Maybe he'll just be some other team's problem. I don't feel he's deserving of that. Playing hockey should be a privilege. And to a point where a guy like Mitchell Miller should be able to, maybe could still play in some lower tier league somewhere, even after what he did. I think it's bullshit. It's such bullshit. Like there's no
Yeah, but we don't know that. We don't know that he's going to play anywhere. I mean,
we don't. But
let's see where this goes. I don't see anywhere for him to play anywhere near North America.
But that's it, right? Like the fact that, our first thinking is, I mean, if it wasn't for what's going on in Russia, our first thinking is, well, yeah, he'll go play in Russia. Like, I don't really feel he should be deserving of that. But anyway, what about in terms of?
Well, yeah, the Bruins are going to wear this though. Like to speak the original point, of course. I mean, Cam Neely, Don Sweeney. This is something that they now is very publicly on their record, right? I mean, they've both now had to have press conferences discussing this signing. In Sweeney's case, he was loosely trying to defend it, although he really didn't do a compelling job. In Neely's case, he's falling on the sword and having to apologize and highlight all the areas that they messed up. I think this does reflect terribly on their organization. And let's remember, I mean, I don't know how long that lasts for. Like that's I put out a tweet on Sunday night. Like, I don't know how to quantify the damage done here because it's so hard to know how we'll view. I mean, we're never going to view this as it just, time sometimes whittles away our memories of things, but I do think this is going to stay with them for a long time. I really can't remember a situation like this. The closest situation like this is when Arizona drafted this kid and then had to renounce the draft pick. I'd never seen that before. I can't really think of a time I've seen anything like this. Like within 2 days, they're renouncing the contract. I mean, it's not clear yet if they're terminating this deal, which would mean they probably don't have to pay him, or if it's a buyout of some sort in which they will have to pay a penalty. Maybe they'll cite a breach of contract and go to some sort of form of arbitration, maybe claiming that the player lied here or misrepresented himself. I don't know how they're getting rid of this, but I mean, it's going to cost them some money, and it's cost them a lot more important things than money. I mean, their credibility as an organization takes a massive hit. And as I say, at least the players, I give those guys credit. Honestly, I have so much respect. This is what I find weird. The years I've been a journalist in the NHL, Julian, the Bruins have been a top organization most of that time. I've covered them in 3 Stanley Cup finals. I have a lot of respect for a lot of people in the organization, but unfortunately, everybody kind of wears this a bit. But I'm really impressed that those players stood up and made their voices heard, because I think all of that added to the snowball going downhill that the Bruins had no choice but to get out from under this deal, right? I mean, you have the players saying what they did. You have the commissioner of the league speaking out. You have the fact the AHL is probably not going to let the players skate in Providence. You get to a point, and then the Carnegie Institute tweets that you mentioned. There's just there was so much momentum. The Bruins had no choice by Sunday night but to get out from under this and wear it. And I think they'll be wearing it for a long time.
Do you think that Don Sweeney and or Cam Neely will be removed for their jobs for this? Is that an actual discussion worth having?
I don't know. Honestly, it's because ultimately they work for the Jacobs family, and who knows what I don't know how they view this. I guess there's a possibility though. I mean, look, it's clearly a form of mismanagement. It's a pretty big piece of mismanagement. So I don't know how their ownership will view that. But at this point, I mean, there's no reason to think that's the case, I suppose, because Cam Neely's out answering questions and apologizing. So I assume that he's okay, but I'm not sure what the fallout will be beyond that.
Okay. Trying to just keep track of some of the quotes that are coming in as we're recording live. But one of my colleague in the business, Jimmy Murphy, who covers the Boston Bruins for Boston Hockey Now, I think is at that press conference, and he did ask a question. I'm actually trying to pull it up here. He says he just put out a tweet. I asked Bruins team president Cam Neely on whether or not he felt duped by Mitchell Miller and Eustace King, and he said he couldn't get into that at this time. And he also asked Neely if this will go down as the biggest regret of his career as an NHL exec. And he says, definitely. I mean, yeah, it's something that they'll have to wear forever. And the fact that the victim wasn't consulted by the team in any of this, an absolute blind spot. A big blind spot on the part of the Boston Bruins. It's something we should not forget. And we've seen in some of the commentary, one article in particular from Michael Stevens, who writes for the Hockey News, it makes it seem as if the sport of hockey hasn't learned from some of the past events we've had to all kind of sift through with the Kyle Beach incident in Chicago, for example. Like, it's just
I don't know
shot
about that,
towards
though.
hockey
Like,
culture. That's interesting. Okay.
Like, look at it. I guess it's a fair point, but we don't know of one other team that was willing to sign this guy. Like I think this team deserves the heat. We're putting the heat on them. I don't even think it ends here. Honestly, like, I think at some point Bruins ownership is going to have to answer for this as well. I don't think this will just go away. But how can we say all of hockey culture is broken? And I'm not defending it, but like, my point is look at all the people that came out and applied pressure here. I mean, to me, there's some signs of growth in that. I'm not saying like, oh, let's sit around and clap, because like, this is an awful situation. And again, I feel like what gets lost a lot is, the victim and his family, and this, they have to live through this all again, right? Like, they're thrust into the media. They're having to answer all these questions. They're having to relive all the things that Mitchell Miller did to their son. And that's awful. But I don't know that all of hockey's broken here. Like, I actually look at it like this shouldn't have happened at all. But look at the reaction. Look at how sternly Gary Bettman spoke against it. I don't see anyone putting their heads in the sand here on this. I see growth in this, honestly. Let's face facts. We're never going to get to a day where shit's going to happen. It's just the truth. Like, unfortunately, we work for a better world, but we're never going to get to a perfect world in anything, in any aspect of society. And, I see hockey holding itself to a higher standard here than maybe in the past. Honestly, I saw a lot of people speaking out about this, and including players. Again, it's not something I've seen from players before. I've never, ever seen players say, like, I disagree with management, like, openly like that. So I don't know. I think hockey culture deserves to be criticized. That's not, like, at times there's absolutely, like, it's fair criticism, and there's all kinds of things that aren't great, but I think you can look at this situation and see growth from what would have happened 10 years ago.
I think hockey culture is in the process of being fixed. I think it is broken, but to your point, yes, like, there have been a lot of people speaking out against this. There are a lot of people who are making the point, hey, like, we're not keeping our heads in the sand. We're going to make this a story, and we're going to spotlight this. And
did anyone with a platform, like, sorry to interrupt, Julian, but did anyone with a real platform stand up and defend this?
Can't think of anyone who would.
I realize, like, some reporters took criticism maybe for not coming out so harshly against it, but, like, I didn't see anyone actually try to defend this and be like, this kid deserves a second chance or something. Only the Bruins messed this up. Let's be honest. Like, they're the only team. Like, I know of other teams that were contacted by representation for Mitchell Miller, and it was like a short 3-second conversation. Like, I don't get the sense there was like 10 teams lining up to sign him or anything like that. I think it was a hard slog for them to even find one, and that one made a huge mistake.
100%. The point I was ultimately trying to make here is that because of what has happened over the last year or so, even beyond that, I really feel that there are a lot more people who are realizing, hey, we need to be up to date on these things, and we need to put people's feet to the fire when it comes to these serious topics. If we're going to be anywhere close to fostering a better culture for hockey. And yeah, I guess when stuff like this happens, it's very easy to say, well, all of hockey culture is still in a bad place and it's broken and all that. I still think it is. But to your point, Siege, like, yeah, there are people who are trying to make it better, and they're trying to fix this. And I think you're right. The reaction, you made a really good point, actually. The reaction to this is a sign that, there are people trying to make it better. And I think it's very fair to say, like, hey, there are people trying to make the sport better. That being said, yeah, definitely still broken of a culture. The fact that a team would think of doing this, I mean, whether or not it's Mitchell Miller duped them or whatever, that you're right. They thought they could get away with this. And that's still a very, very big problem. The fact that the organization just thought it was an isolated incident, and they didn't get away with it.
This is like giant pie in the face. Like we're talking about an original six team, a team that's won more games in the last 10 or 15 years than pretty much everyone else. Like we're talking about guys on this roster going to the Hall of Fame. Like this is an esteemed franchise and they are being dragged on this and rightfully so. Like I think it's a really big moment. Honestly, again, I wish it didn't happen. Like I'm not just trying to pull like the little positives out of an awful story and what just had to have been a brutal experience for the victim and his family. But I think you can look at this and say like things are changing, man. Maybe not quick enough. This should never have happened to begin with. But like, do you think? I mean, I'd like to think that this will give everyone pause in the future. I don't know. I see some growth in the wider league's response to all this.
Two other things I want to mention before. Actually, three things really. One, another tweet just from the press conference here. Connor Ryan, Cam Neely on how much the comments of veterans like Nick Foligno and Patrice Bergeron on Saturday influenced Sunday's decisions to cut ties with Miller. There's a lot of factors in this decision, and that was one of them. That's the first thing. The second thing is
they should have listened. They
should have listened.
Patrice Bergeron talked to management a week before and said he wasn't on board. Like
it shouldn't have even gotten to this point.
Yeah, that's the craziest part to me is like that you bother to consult Patrice Bergeron and you don't heed his advice like that. It's actually, I mean, I would trust Patrice Bergeron to run that team more than the people in charge of it right now. Like I think the world of that guy. I think he's like beyond reproach, like just been one of the classiest players of this generation, really thoughtful, smart guy, polite, just if he was running the organization, they wouldn't have signed him. And one day he probably will be running the organization.
Cam Neely on if he is planning discipline for anyone within the Bruins organization for this signing. This is also from Connor Ryan. That's something I have to deal with today and this week and see where it takes me. It should not have gotten to this point if you're going to bring in the leadership core in place. Not to mention, Patrice Bergeron had to answer about this on two different occasions. You're mentioning the scrum you had with him when the Bruins were in Toronto. He had to do that interview with Elliot Friedman as well. Like, that's two instances where Patrice Bergeron has to speak on this instance and
well, I'm sure they're going to have to talk about it again today. I don't know what their schedule is, but whenever their players are next speaking to the media, it will continue to be a topic, I'm sure.
Absolutely. The two other things I wanted to mention, the Eustace King thing for me personally, like that is the biggest mind-blowing moment for me. Just because, look, the fact that the victim is Black, obviously, for me, in terms of representation, that's something I think about. The fact that Mitchell Miller's agent is Black, like I can't not get that out of my head. And I wish I had a better line of thinking for how I want to discuss that part of it. But that is the biggest, like I can't, that's like of all the things to be like, wow, I can't believe this team would do this. Wow, I can't believe this signing would happen. The fact that Mitchell Miller, the biggest plot twist in all this is that the Mitchell Miller's agent is not just a Black man, but sits on like, is it the league's like chair of diversity and inclusion, like, and has prominent Black clients and has a client who is known for doing something terrible to a Black teenager. Like, that doesn't compute in my mind. That doesn't make any sense. And it bothers me. It really bothers me. I can't imagine what those other clients like Wayne Simmons would feel. But as someone who watches the game and is trying to, cares very much about representation, seeing people like me in either places of management or agents or even in podcasting, like this bothers me. And I'm sorry I don't have a better thought than that to be like, oh, well, you shouldn't have done this or whatever. All I can really say is that this bothers me. This very much bothers me. I don't know if in my writing career or anything like that where I'm going to have to deal with Eustace, I don't know how that's going to go. Actually, I did interview him for another story years ago, but I don't know how often I'm going to have to do that. The only thing I could really say is that really bothers me. And I know among other Black hockey fans, I know I'm not the only one who feels that way. That is the big thing I want to say about Eustace. The only other thing I could say is my colleague at The Athletic, Fluto Shinzawa, has done an incredible job in covering the story, reaching out to the Meyer Crothers family, being right on it from the jump. He's also in that press conference as well with Cam Neely. And I will also show love to Sean Gentili, who has also done a great job in writing about this as well. So I will just mention those two writers. And if you're subscribed to The Athletic, please read their work over the last few days, because they have done a tremendous job in covering this story. I think, I guess the only other thing I could say is just, thinking of the victim at this time. I can imagine they're not doing well. And I believe it's been reported that they're not doing as well with everything that is going on. CJ, is there anything else you want to add before we move on?
No. What a shitty thing.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. It's a really shitty thing. We do have Ask CJ questions, and we are going to make them a little lighter. It is a bit of a tougher transition. There are some other NHL topics. I don't know, CJ, if you want to still kind of go to those, or if you want to just go straight to Ask CJ.
Maybe just go to Ask CJ. I mean, we got a Thursday show. We can go around the league a little bit more then, but this was too important for us to just pigeonhole into a 5-minute conversation.
100%. Thank you to everyone who sent questions in over Twitter, over Discord as well. We always appreciate the Ask CJ segments on the Monday. And yeah, again, a bit of a tough transition from our previous topic to now. But these things are going to happen as the culture of hockey is in the process of being fixed. So let's get to this first tweet from RW Jumper 123, which is actually about the New Jersey Devils. This is a really interesting question, CJ. Waiting for some talk on the Devils' hot start. Is the Devils' rebuild officially over and destined for the playoffs? Great comeback over the Oilers the other night. If I'm not mistaken, you've listed the New Jersey Devils as a sleeper team, haven't you? You're actually big on the New Jersey Devils doing well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember all my other predictions, and I'm sure they're all gone to junk, but that was one of my predictions, that they were going to be the sleeper team of the year, the team that took the biggest jump that no one was really talking about or wasn't getting a lot of hype. So far I feel pretty good about that. What's interesting is my thinking at that time was, digging into the results and talking to some people around the team, is that the thought was, if they just sort of got average goaltending, because they had such poor goaltending last year, that alone would see them rise. Well, they're not really getting great goaltending just yet. And that might still come. It's early days, but I didn't look before our show this morning, but they were still like high 800s as a team save percentage. So it's not like all of a sudden they're throwing a Carter Hart in there, which is, a big reason why Philadelphia's off to a good start, is Carter Hart's been out of his mind. Philadelphia, or New Jersey rather, is doing it with basically their young players are taking the next step. Obviously, Jesper Bratt's had a huge start to the year. What a great story he is. I mean, he's a 4th, 5th round pick. Anyway, lower round draft pick. He's still only 24. He's had a hot start, having Jack Hughes back healthy, Nico Hischier. They're just a good team. And I think the year is there for them. What's interesting is who falls out, right? You have Washington and Pittsburgh, two sort of perennial teams, making the playoffs in the Metropolitan Division. Both are kind of skidding out of the gates here. Maybe it's one of those teams that gets leapfrogged by the Devils, but I think New Jersey is worthy of some hype, and we're going to be talking about them a lot because, I could see them being a team that if this continues as you get later towards the trade deadline, maybe they're looking at adding to bolster those playoff chances. And I think there's a lot of good things going on with the Devils, and it's kind of how it's supposed to work, right? I mean, teams like New Jersey and Buffalo and Detroit to a lesser degree, like they've been down for a while, they've drafted high, and then you develop those players, and eventually you're supposed to ascend up the standings.
Yep. They also got that win over the Calgary Flames over the weekend. They looked like a really good team. I know Calgary's kind of a little bit on the downward slide, but seeing guys like Jack Hughes try to step up. I know Bratt was held pointless in that game. They have a lot of young talent. They look really cool. And it's still not lost on me that fans at the beginning of the year booed Lindy Ruff. And now the Devils seem to be doing pretty well. It's funny how things change.
Well, look, where a week ago, what were we doing? We were like running the Leafs out of town, and they won 3 straight games since then. And all of a sudden, no one's firing coaches, no one's trading star players, and everything's, winning is the best antidote to any sort of criticism or complaint from the fans and the media.
Well, you would think. And then the Boston Bruins did what they did. Anyway, Matthew M.W. Bauer on Twitter has the next question. How long have you been growing your beard?
A couple of years. It all started. I probably told the story, but I'm notorious for retelling stories on the pod because we have so many pods. But a few years ago, I just let the beard grow in the summertime because I wasn't on TV. And I actually went to a party at Nick Kiprios's house, who was my colleague at Sportsnet at the time. And our stylist, Deb Berman, was there. And she's like, "Hey, that looks good on you. Do you want to keep that?" And so that's kind of how I got to keep it. Because believe it or not, TV has a say in what you look like. And so they approved it. And, I've basically had it ever since. So that's probably 4 or 5 years now. And I don't see a circumstance I get rid of it. It needs a little trimming now. If you're watching us on YouTube, got to get it dialed in before Hockey Hall of Fame weekend coming up this week. Big weekend in hockey here in Toronto. But it's been a few years, and I enjoy not having to shave every single day.
I don't think I've ever heard that story. 1, 2, what's your beard routine? Like, what do you have? Like beard oil you're using? Like what's the routine with taking care of your beard?
Yeah, I have beard oil that I put in there, and then I largely just go to my man Safe, my barber here in Toronto, to get it done properly. So I haven't seen Safe, so this is not his fault that it's a little shaggy at the moment in the last couple of weeks. But normally go get it trimmed up. That's, for me, it's like one of my favorite things. Like I don't know why, going to get a haircut and a beard trim, like Safe is awesome. My guy, couldn't speak higher of him. If you're in Toronto at Rendezvous Barbers, this is a non-paid ad, but just they do a great job. And I go sit for like an hour and we catch up on life. And that's like a decadent activity for me. And not just because you end up looking good. Like you feel pampered when you go there. I love it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm glad we share the same appreciation for good barbers and being pampered for that hour. It means the world. From Damn Daniel on Discord. All-star sleepers. Who do you think could make the All-Star game this year that we wouldn't have thought of at the start of the season? Gabe Vilardi in Los Angeles comes to mind.
Yeah. How about Jesper Bratt? I don't think he would have been too high on everyone's list. Dominic Kubelik's had a huge start in Detroit. Free agent signing for them. I mean, let's face it, it's probably going to be Dylan Larkin or something like that when push comes to shove. But, maybe someone like him gets in there. Erik Karlsson, he's been an all-star in the past, but he had sort of seen his star dim in recent years. He's off to the kind of start where that would be possible. I think there's a lot of them. The problem with the All-Star game in a way is most teams really only get one player. And so, part of the pick isn't just that you're having a great season. It's, it's name value. It's all those sorts of things. And so like, full credit to Gabe Vilardi having a massive start with the Kings, but I just think ultimately, it's maybe a Kevin Fiala or Drew Doughty or someone when it comes time to pick that team. But there's been a lot of players that if you go to the scoring list and sort, there are a few names that you're used to seeing there that aren't there, and there's a few guys that you'd be surprised are right up there, off to an amazing start.
From WPG Jets, are you surprised by the Winnipeg Jets? Good start. Who would have guessed that WP Jets would be a Jets fan? Will Connor Hellebuck win the Vezina this year?
He could. He's going to have a hard push, though, it looks like, from Carter Hart. It was crazy. I looked it up on Sunday. So Carter Hart has 16 goals. Well, it's 15.9 goals saved above expected, and he's allowed 16 goals. So the expected value of his season through 8 games was that he would allow 32 goals, and he'd only allowed 16. So that's a pretty crazy start. Now, I'm not sure that's sustainable. He faces a lot of pucks in Philly. We'll see. Obviously, Shesterkin and Vasilevsky and UC Saros and guys that are in the mix would be there. Jake Ottinger, if, once he's healthy in Dallas, could be around there. But, Hellebuck wouldn't surprise me if he wanted or was in the mix. And I think he's probably the biggest key to the good start for Winnipeg. I'd say I'm pleasantly surprised. I did look at their team, though, and I just see a lot of talent. And Rick Bowness has historically done a pretty good job of getting his teams to play better defensively. And I think that's been Winnipeg's biggest issue. Now, unfortunately, Rick has been out with COVID-19 for most of the season. He hasn't had a chance to run as many practices or be behind the bench there as you'd like. I think that there's still a lot of growth the Jets can have defensively. There's still they're still about an even goal differential team. So they've got a lot of wins, but process has to still get a little better. But yeah, I wouldn't say I'm hugely surprised, because I did think they were a playoff caliber team, and they've looked that way to start.
From Chaotic Neutral on Discord, what would you do if you won the Powerball? The next estimated jackpot is at $1.9 billion.
I don't know. Like, what would anyone do with that amount of money? I mean, first of all, I guess obviously people have that amount of money that they've built a company or whatever, like crazy big company. And so you're used to it. But like, if you hand someone like me who does not have anywhere near that kind of security / whatever, I think it's a bit of a burden, frankly, to have that much money. I don't know, man. I'll make sure to buy my man Julian something nice. I have no clue. I'm not playing the Powerball lottery, so it would scare me to get that much money. Like, what do you do with that? Everyone will look at you differently in your whole life. Like, everything changes overnight, and I don't know. I wouldn't want that kind of wealth.
I think the fact that like people who probably you haven't spoken to in the longest while, all of a sudden would be like, "Hey, what's good, CJ? You got 1.9 billion. Congrats, brother." Like, you're going to get a whole, that's what would scare me the most. Like, all these people, like you say, looking at you different. People just looking at you. Like, that would terrify me if I won 1.9 billion, not million, $1 billion.
Right. And maybe a better question, because 1.9 billion, it's just like, I can't even put my mind around that. But I have thought, like, let's just say someone gave you 10 million or something that you think you could more or less retire on today. I'd still want to work. Like, I'm still at a spot where obviously I really love what I do. I love our podcast. So I wouldn't want to seek that amount of money, even because I guess it would be nice to just know that your future's taken care of in that way. But I don't know. You need a purpose in your life. So, I just avoid actually playing the lottery in general. It's funny. My birthday just passed, and Coburg Papa gave me a lottery ticket in the card, and I won $61. So,
hey,
which is pretty funny. But yeah, like, largely do avoid paying the lottery. That was one exception, and I won some money. So thanks, Dad.
Hey, $61. Hopefully that doesn't go to waste. From Dallas Stars fan on Discord, favorite chore around the house that makes you feel irrationally accomplished, and least favorite chore around the house that you avoid at absolutely all costs.
I like doing the dishes for some reason. Like, I really like the process of doing the dishes, putting dishes away out of the dishwasher, what have you. I've never minded that for whatever reason. Like, even if we have a big family Thanksgiving, like, I don't mind stepping in the kitchen for an hour and doing all those dishes. I find it kind of like oddly therapeutic or soothing. I can't say I love doing everything else though. I'm not a handyman or anything like that. So, maybe like cleaning the windows or something might be the thing I would avoid the most, any sort of deep clean. But I like to keep a tidy house. I don't mind dishes and laundry and that stuff, but I'm not spending the whole weekend scrubbing, put it that way.
I feel my answer would be laundry for that one. I feel accomplished when I put together laundry. Everything else, like sweeping and stuff, I hate. One last one, which I think is a good question. How do you handle calling out bad practice organizations while not damaging your relationship with those involved? Is there a point where you would deem the relationship not worth calling them out? This is from Jakers on Discord.
I think it's a fair question. It's the sort of, when you do a job like mine, it's part of every decision you make, in a sense. It's not that you're even conscious of it, but let's face it, when I report something that someone might not want reported, you're cognizant of the fact that you might be damaging their relationship. I think the only way you can do it is you have to be true to yourself. You have to be fair. You have to apologize or own it when you make mistakes, which do happen from time to time. And I think ultimately the truth is you can't be worried about every relationship. Like, a lot of these relationships ebb and flow is my experience anyway. It's not like any one GM or any one agent or any one person you talk to loves you all the time. But I think if you're around and you're respectful and you do your job fairly, I think most people over time, you might go through a cool period where they don't like something you're doing, but generally they're going to go, do you know what? At least he was fair. And so something like this, if you're talking about the Bruins thing, like there'd be no reason not to say what you think. Cause it's such a profoundly bad decision. And I think the people in charge of those decisions now realize that a few days too late. But I mean, I don't think that they should expect criticism and the questioning that they're getting.
Yeah. And that's a good way to end our Monday edition of the CJ Show. Siege, pleasure as always. And I know today was a really tough episode to do in light of the Mitchell Miller thing, but I think you did an incredible job.
Oh, thanks, bud. You just don't want to say something wrong, or, it's hard to sometimes, like, the weight of all this, like, you don't want it to come out the wrong way. So I hope we were fair to the victim and to the subject.
I agree. We'll be back on Thursday with a brand new episode. We'll have stick taps then. Subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts and check out everything else on the SDPN network. For CJ, I'm Julian, saying so long, and we'll be back on Thursday.
The Chris Johnston Show.
Powered by Sports Interaction, Canada's sportsbook.
Inside the Game, twice a week. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris. And follow Jillian McKenzie @JK McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.